Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Schaefer. I can't believe the bad luck we're having, but I didn't want us to get far behind, so I hope you don't mind that I'm recording this lecture on vocabulary development systems, and we'll be applying it to Chapter 4 in Ed Psych, which is in preparation for what you guys will be doing this week, and then you'll be doing your homework on part of Chapter 4, and if you want to, on Chapter 5 to get ready for next week. So let's get started. I'm just going to show you where we are in our course calendar. So class would have been yesterday on Monday on vocabulary development systems. I will talk a little bit about self-testing, and we would have applied it to Chapter 4 in class, which is what I'm going to do today. And then we'll talk a little bit about the reading journal, but I think we'll actually just do that together in class when I see you. So we are looking at, developing this important technical vocabulary, which is, different from maybe some of the other vocabulary systems you've used in the past, where it might have been enough to just memorize the word and its definition. Now that you're getting into your content courses, you'll see that we're talking more about concepts and big ideas, which are much bigger, broader, more challenging than just memorizing words and their definitions. So we're going to look at some strategies to do that. And so just as a quick review, we're starting Chapter 4, which is student diversity. And so best practice should have you looking at the outline first for each chapter. What's the impact of culture on teaching and learning? You're going to look at socioeconomic status and how that affects student achievement, how ethnicity and race affect student school experiences, how language differences and bilingual programs affect student achievement, what is multicultural education, how do gender and gender bias affect student school experience, and how do students differ in intelligence and learning styles. So we get a good idea of what the chapter is about. We look quickly at the learning outcomes for the chapter, so by the end you should be able to do these things. So you're going to take a minute to look at those. You may want to stop and read the story that they have that kind of sets the stage for what are the problems, what does this look like in a real classroom, and the questions that real teachers have about these issues. And then you're going to skim to the back of the chapter, to the summary, and again you're going to look at these summaries of what each of these big questions are, right? The impacts of culture on teaching and learning. These are huge questions. So you're going to want to look at each of these: socioeconomic status, ethnicity and race. Again, language differences. You're going to take the time to look at these summaries. What is multicultural education? Again, gender and gender bias. And students, how they differ in intelligence and learning styles, and then some of the key terms. So in the old days, you might have just, taken these terms, looked for the definitions in the book, and felt that you had done a good job of preparation for what you need to know about these ideas. But I think you'll see pretty quickly when we get into some of the strategies I'm going to suggest you use, that it's not as simple as just those words and a definition. So I picked out one of the first ones. While these are in alphabetical order, once you go back in and you start to read in more depth the chapter, you'll see that pretty quickly you get into a discussion about culture. And the big question is, what's the impact of culture on teaching and learning? And so the very first strategy we're going to look at, while you may have used index cards in the past, I call these not your mama's index cards because it's a whole new day. So this idea of culture, while I did copy the definition and I took the time to write the page number, which is page 80, and the definition that's in the book is language, attitudes, ways of behaving, and other aspects of life that characterize people. This is just such a big idea, and it impacts what happens in the classroom in so many ways that it can't be really captured in that definition. To memorize that doesn't have much to do with really understanding what this is and the impact of it on the classroom. So I jotted down a question that I had: what's my culture, and what's the impact of my culture on my own teaching and my own students? So that's a question I have in the back of my mind as I'm looking at this, is connecting it again to myself before I can connect it to my students, and the impact of the different cultures and how that works and happens in the classroom. So that's a question I have for myself that I'd like to come back and answer. So that's one side of my index card, right? So my flashcard, culture, and I have this brief definition from page 80 in the book. But now I start to break it out. So as I start to read it more closely in the book, I realize that they've kind of expanded on this definition to say, culture are shared norms, traditions, behaviors, language, perceptions. And they start to go to, what are some problems, right? So the problems with culture is the tendency to value the mainstream high status group culture. And in my mind, I'm saying, well, what is that? And to devalue others. And then in school culture generally reflects the mainstream culture, because teachers come generally from that mainstream, which happens to have middle class values. They place a high value on competition and independence rather than cooperation and peer orientation, which when you get into this more closely, you'll see that there are differences within different groups of what they value, what's more important, right? And that in school culture in general, it's a highly verbal culture. We speak a lot. We'd like you to speak a lot. There's an emphasis placed on having students working independently rather than in groups, and with competition for grades and recognition. So while I'm not teaching you culture, I want you to pay attention to what are the things that I pulled out while I was reading in this index card. So what were some of the problems with culture and the way our culture is now and in the classroom, and how that could actually impact students who come from other cultures, and why that's a problem, right? So thinking through those things, and to get a handle on this idea of culture, the book gives you this really nice illustration of this culture and diversity wheel, and it's talking about the individual and who we are and how we behave and what we believe, and what are those influences, what impacts us. So it has, social class, nationality, race, ethnicity, ability and disability, religion, geographic area, gender, and it can be many more than that, but those are some of the big groups. So it might be useful to you at this point as you're trying to understand this notion of culture and how it might impact what's happened to you in the classroom, what impact you may have on your students in the classroom, to do this for yourself, right? So you could jot down as you put these things here. For me, my social class is middle class. My nationality is United States. My race is that I'm a Caucasian. Ethnicity is I have a German background. The things, my abilities and disabilities, where I'm trained to be a teacher. My religious background is Catholic. My geographic areas, I come from the mid-Atlantic states. My gender is I'm female. So all of those things impact who I am and get more complex over time as my experiences expand. So it could be useful for you to take a minute to do this as you're trying to understand this notion of culture, right? So you can see how it's not as simple as a word and its definition. It's much bigger than that. And so this is the backside of that index card as I start to fill it out as I read and have more questions. As I went through and looked at race and ethnicity, I thought, well, gosh, these are two ideas that we often get confused. And so, what's the difference between these two? And I started to jot some ideas there, which I think can lead us into our next strategy. So do you see that this idea of index card is much bigger, much broader than perhaps how you've looked at it in the past. So it can be very useful as you're getting important ideas out of the book and onto the page, and starting to make those connections between what you know and new material, and connections to application in the classroom. So that's a very useful strategy, is the new and improved, not your mama's index cards. So I'm going to stop this part here and let you go in and perhaps try this with some of the other big ideas as you read, like multicultural education, just such a big on page 99, or try this with multiple intelligences on page 105, or socioeconomic status, right? These are some really big ideas. Gender bias, language differences, and bilingual education, right? These are things that can't be defined in just a sentence or two, right? So I want you to go in and pick two of those and do an index card with that, an expanded index card with two of those ideas as you read the text, and then come back and we'll do the second strategy.